Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our session on investing in Canada. My name is Brian Bledsoe. I'm Head of International Partner at Irwin Mitchell, and I'm very pleased that you have joined us this afternoon, and particular thanks to our panelists today. I'll introduce the panelists in a bit more detail in due course, but just very briefly, we have Lauren Frater and Colin Russell from the Department of International Trade. We have Eric Kucharsky from Invest Quebec. We have Genevieve Gagnier, Michel Disseroux, and Isabelle Tremblay from Group TCJ, a firm of Canadian lawyers who Irwin Mitchell work very closely with. I'd like to just run through a couple of housekeeping matters at the beginning of the session, if that's okay with everyone. Thank you to those who have already submitted questions. You can submit additional questions throughout the session via the Q&A button on the function on the screen, and we'll answer them at the end. The only proviso I'd say there is we have got a very full programme today, and we'll be committed to finishing on time. If we don't get to all of the Q&As, we will answer them directly to each of you. When submitting questions, please can you include your name and email address so that we can respond directly if that's the case. We'll be recording this session and this will be sent out afterwards. Towards the end of the session, we're posting a feedback link, so if you could spend a few moments completing that at the end of the session, we'd be very grateful. So I'd like to just move now to the first session without further ado. Pleased to be joined, as I mentioned, by Lauren Frater and Colin Russell from the DIT, the government body we work very closely with at Irwin Mitchell. Lauren has headed up overseas trade teams for the DIT for the last 7 years in Brazil and since 2017 in Toronto. Her team is based in the UK's diplomatic missions across Canada and supports UK exporters into Canada. Colin is an experienced international business advisor. He's working with the DIT and he works with businesses to help them develop and implement strategies for international growth. So I'd like to hand over firstly to Lauren, and Lauren, you'll then pass on to Colin. So if I may, please can I pass to you?
That's great. It's wonderful to be with you all. Good afternoon to those of you in the UK. It's a bright sunny morning here in Toronto where I am joining you from. So as was said, I'm Lauren Frater. I'm the Director for Exports into Canada, and we support UK exporters to get their products into the market here. On the next slide, you'll see a brief agenda that takes us through what we're going to be talking about today. So I'm going to give you a quick market overview and a few facts about Canada that might be of interest, a little bit about COVID-19 and the impact that it's had on the market, some market dynamics that are specific to Canada and considerations for if you're looking to do business here, a bit of a rundown of the sectors where Canada is strongest, and some more detail about the kind of support that the Department for International Trade can provide to UK exporters seeking to do business here. So on the next slide, you'll see a few facts about Canada, and the first thing to kind of mention is just the size of the market and the size of the country. Geographically, it's the second largest country with a population of around 37 million, and that's 40 times the size of the UK, and just the province of Ontario alone, where Toronto is located, is 4 times the size of the UK, so it's a lot of geography to cover. The system of government here is municipal, regional, provincial and federal. So either city governments, such as the City of Toronto, regional governments, and then the provincial governments, much like the states in the US, there are provincial level governments that have their own sets of regulations, and the federal whole of Canada government sits above that. And as part of USMCA, it is part of a free trade market of 450 million people that covers trade of about 1.2 trillion Canadian dollars per year. So obviously the situation that we're in at the moment with COVID has had an impact on trade between the UK and Canada. And on the next slide, you see a few implications of that. Canada has put in place support for the economy through wage support programs rather than always unemployment benefits. The provinces, in their capacity governing their territories, oversaw lockdown and phased reopening measures that are in various stages of reopening at the moment. And the impact on UK-Canada trade has been mixed. Goods exports have increased, but services exports have decreased. And a lot of that is to do with the need for that face-to-face interaction and the travel required for service organisations, which has been non-impossible recently. But on the 7th of September, Canada opened its borders to fully vaccinated travellers, removing the need for quarantine and travel exemptions. Business travellers will still need to comply with testing requirements and complete the ArriveCan app before travelling. Just moving on to the next slide, talking a little bit about the market dynamics. So there is a similar business culture between the UK and Canada. There are relatable business practices and social networks. For example, Canadian law is based on English law, except for Quebec, which follows civil law. Canada has a universal healthcare system, which is similar to the NHS, but is delivered at that provincial level. So there is a similar understanding of the healthcare system to that of the UK. Depending on the sector, Canada isn't usually a test market for products or services. It is an affluent and sophisticated customer base. So the market likes to see a track record of sales or use in the UK and potentially other markets such as the US before you break into this market. It is an ethnically diverse population, and Canada is growing through immigration. The immigration quota is usually between 200 and 300,000 per year based on labour market needs and a points-based system. The urban areas, and Toronto in particular, are very diverse areas, with more than 50% of the population here in Toronto coming from outside of Toronto and outside of Canada in some cases. It's very much innovation, partnership and research and development driven in the tech sector. So Canada has very generous research and development tax credit programs, including programs for international collaboration. However, much of this is caveated that the intellectual property must remain in Canada. So significant opportunities for the tech sector through that collaboration program, but some cautions there around how to manage your intellectual property if using some of the programs available. The big 5 banks here in Canada are stable, and after an initial slow pace are now quick to embrace fintech solutions. So the fintech market is one that is growing, it is one that is developing in Canada through homegrown fintech, but is also receptive for fintech solutions coming from other markets. And I would say that the UK is seen as a leader in that area here as well. You'll also be aware that post our exit from the European Union, there was a trade continuity agreement that entered into force, and that maintains tariff-free access to the market for 98% of goods exports, and also preserves that access that we had under the EU trade agreement. Negotiations on a new FTA are expected to start in due course. We've just had an election here in Canada, and once we have cabinet appointments and the government is installed, we will be seeking to start those negotiations as soon as possible. We recently ran a call for inputs for business to feed into what they wanted to see from a UK-Canada free trade agreement. And there is still space to submit any views or opinions that you have before the negotiating mandate is finalised. So Canada is an export-driven market as part of the USMCA free trade agreement. About 75% of Canada's exports head to the US, but they're keen to diversify their trading partners. The UK ranks as Canada's top market in Europe for exports and is around its 4th market globally. On the next slide, just a few things to consider if you're looking to do business in Canada. So this is a very competitive market. In many sectors, there's both domestic and foreign competition, in many instances from the US, given the significant Canada-US trading relationship. UK suppliers coming into the market should prepare fully for the market, be export ready, and seeking good commercial opportunities with the capacity to deliver. Canada is also officially a bilingual market, so dual language, English and French. About 25% of the population speaks French as their first language and that is concentrated in the province of Quebec. This influences business practices in the province, and for example, bids and contracts may need to be submitted in French. Having a local partner or in-market representative could help with this aspect of doing business in Quebec. Regulations also differ at the provincial and federal levels depending on which authority has competence. There can be different barriers to trading across the country. As I said, there's those 13 different markets from the 10 provinces and the 3 territories. But even Canadian companies can experience difficulties when trading across different provinces internally. So depending on the sector, product or service, to cover that large market and all of the different provinces, you may want to consider whether you require more than one representative in country. For example, if you're in the beverage alcohol business, the liquor boards are concentrated at the provincial level, and so you may find that agents cover and represent a product only for a specific province or area. In many instances, investment in relationship building and market education are important before a commercial win is realistic. For example, in the infrastructure space, where we help a lot of companies, projects are much longer term, and building awareness of capabilities, market visibility, and positioning is important to the market and to find a partner that fits. So moving on to some of the sector strengths in Canada. Advanced manufacturing is a big one here. Canada is ranked the 12th largest vehicle manufacturer in the world, and much of that manufacturing is based in the southern part of Ontario. Agribusiness is another key area, and Canada ranks as the 7th largest food exporter in the world. Clean tech is a growing area due to the commitment to a low emissions economy, and this area is open to collaboration with both local and global partners. Canada gets about 67% of its electricity and 17% of its energy from renewable sources, and is the world's 2nd largest producer of hydroelectricity. Water technology solutions with clusters in Ontario, Quebec and BC, and there are hydrogen and fuel cell technology clusters led by British Columbia. Carbon capture, utilisation and storage is also another area that is growing, and there are clusters in Saskatchewan, Alberta and again British Columbia. Entertainment and media is another big area. Canada has a broad range of strengths across this space, including in games development, film and television, and the film production sector has been nicknamed Hollywood North. Life sciences are another big area, with many biopharmaceutical companies having premises here in Canada, and the R&D programs, networks and talent span from innovation in the lab through to market, and is also facilitated by global collaboration. Natural resources, mining in particular, as well as for minerals and metals, and also forestry are key areas for Canada. And finally, technology. Canada is home to some of the world's largest tech hubs, growing and attracting innovative talent from across the globe, including the world's 10 largest technology companies. The Toronto-Waterloo-Kitchener Innovation Corridor in southern Ontario is the 2nd largest in North America, has been nicknamed Silicon Valley North. There's a theme emerging here. And software development, artificial intelligence and cybersecurity make up some of the pillars of the tech sector strengths. I'm going to hand over to Colin now, who's just going to talk a little bit about some of the support that is available for companies in the UK.
Thanks, Lauren, and hello everybody. It's good to be with you today. I just very quickly, first of all, we can support your business in the UK developing its international strategy and implementing its strategy and plans. That's what we're here for at the Department for International Trade. We've got a lot of resources available online. You can go to great.gov.uk and find a range of market guides, around 100 countries or more, increasing all the time, including Canada, of course, and a lot of practical advice on developing an international plan, researching a market, and so on, and lots of other help and support. And we also have an export opportunities site where you can find specific opportunities for your business, and you can search on keywords, and it gives you details of the business opportunities and how you can find out more information and get a head start on those. But I'd like to move on now also to talk very briefly about the in-person support in the UK through our network of international trade advisors. So right around the UK, we have independent international business specialists who can give you impartial advice on developing your strategy, developing those all-important connections that Lauren's already mentioned. And many of us have specific sector specialisms, and so we can link you into those as well. We have a range of seminars, webinars and trade shows that we speak at, that we run ourselves or we run with partners, such as today, of course. And we'll be more, and if you get in touch with us, we'll keep you posted about all of those. We offer bespoke market entry and market access services through our teams around the world. And when I hand back to Lauren in a moment, she's going to speak more about that. But I think I should mention that we do also currently have funding available for business that are looking to grow internationally. I'm sure you'd like me to mention that. And currently, businesses can apply for up to £9,000 of match funding for a range of activities to support their international development, including travel and accommodation, but also website development, translation and interpreting, legal and professionals advice, and a range of other costs associated with doing business internationally. So if you want to get access to that, please get in touch with us. We have e-commerce and e-marketplace specialists, if that's your thing. And also, if you're brand new to exporting, think about our Export Academy program, which runs around the country and has a program of introductory events to help get you that all important knowledge to get your business plans up and running for exporting. So lots of help and support, either in person or online. We'd love to be in touch with you to help you with that. And on that, I'll hand back to Lauren. Thanks, Lauren.
Thanks, Colin. That's great. So Colin mentioned the bespoke market research that we can provide. And so we do have an enhanced international support service for those high export potential companies who are referred by an international trade advisor like Colin. They offer tailored one-to-one guidance about exporting, selling to North America, market insight reports and a range of off-the-shelf exporting and sector guides for the markets involved. And they can also offer introductions to specialist service providers for bespoke chargeable support via the Overseas Referral Network. For us, OCO Global manages this process and will offer UK companies 3 options of providers in various categories, whether that's legal, accounting, market research, PR and marketing, or events. My team on the next slide, you'll see, covers priority sectors for the UK. Now, the selection of these sectors is broadly based on where HMG can add the most value due to government-to-government engagement being needed either with planning or purchasing authorities to resolve market access issues and to feed into future trade policy or in highly regulated sectors. So on the next slide, you'll see that our current priority sectors include defence and security, food and drink, infrastructure, financial services, primarily fintech, and civil nuclear. So my team is based in offices throughout Canada, Toronto, Ottawa, Calgary, and Vancouver. And within our priority sectors, we focus on business development support, contributing to trade policy, resolving market access barriers, and that G2G and B2G engagement, including promoting UK thought leadership. On this final slide, I've also, oh, sorry, Thais, we've missed one slide with the in-market support for priority sectors, where you'll see a map with a few stars showing where our offices are. And on the final slide, there are just a few additional resources for those of you who may want to look into this further. So including the Exporting to Canada Guide, Chambers of Commerce, and the High Commission of Canada in London, who we work with very closely for UK companies setting up in Canada. And I will now hand back, I think, to Brian, who's going to introduce the next speakers. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Lauren, and thank you, Colin. I'll now introduce our next speaker, if I may, because as I mentioned at the beginning, there's a lot to get through today. Delighted that Eric Kucharsky can join us. Eric is an economic development professional with extensive experience supporting businesses' growth projects in Quebec. His work involves marketing Quebec as a great place to do business, making the right connections and facilitating entry. So if I may, Eric, I'll pass over to you.
Many thanks, Brian, and glad to follow in Lauren's footsteps, and Lauren and Colin's footsteps to give you a bit more feel and insight into Canada, into the opportunities that are present there. In his introduction, Brian mentioned my role, so I'm with Invest Quebec International, representing the province of Quebec based here in the UK. But today I will give you a broader view of opportunities that are present in Canada, and of course drill down into some more specific opportunities in the province of Quebec. If we can move on to the next slide, please. So you've already had a picture of Canada, of the size of its territory, from the previous speakers. I wanted to go into a bit more detail of some of the key sectors and some of the focus areas geographically across the country that are, that will be of interest to UK businesses looking at coming into the market. One thing that comes out and that stands out in this presentation is, yes, it is a vast territory, but population is concentrated in a relatively narrow band along the southern US border. So with that, you do find sort of concentrations and I'd say landscape that begins to resemble what we'll find here in the UK. Moving west to east, you start off with Vancouver, British Columbia, clusters around there, strengths in the natural resources industry, focused primarily on forestry, fisheries as well, and also a very strong tech cluster. The entire southwestern British Columbia region fits in very closely with the northwestern US, so you find a megapolis stretching from the Bay Area all the way up to the Vancouver region of tech companies, innovation, so on. Focuses on the nutraceutical industry on top of that, as well as a strong agri-food industry. In Vancouver itself, we find one of Canada's superclusters headquartered. That would be the Digital Technologies Supercluster. We focus on quantum technologies, and digital media, software innovation as well. Now, these clusters have a presence across the country, focused on different areas of strength, and were put in place 4 years ago in order to stimulate innovation, to stimulate collaboration between SMEs, large businesses, public and private research institutions. So we find through these supercluster initiatives a number of funding programs, matchmaking programs, and so on. Very interesting when you're looking at the market and looking for collaborations on research and innovation to make an entry point into the Canadian market. Moving further east, provinces of Alberta and Saskatchewan, primarily resources focused, clustered largely on the oil and gas sector in Alberta, also on the agricultural industry, tremendous amount of grains, pulses, and other agricultural products, proteins as well, coming out of the region. In addition, mining, exploration, and mining projects in the region. Moving on to Winnipeg, transportation hub. Again, a gateway into the central, into the Canadian prairie provinces. So a very strong agricultural background and strong innovation industries as well. Ontario, Lauren has already spoken in a lot of detail as to opportunities around the automobile industry and manufacturing industry. Toronto is the financial hub of Canada. We find the headquarters of the major Canadian banks, with the exception of two that are headquartered in Quebec, present in southwestern Ontario. Life sciences industry as well, very present as well. Around Ottawa, naturally, it's the Canadian capital, but also has a very strong technology hub with focuses on cybersecurity in particular. Coming to Quebec, and I'll get into a lot more detail, we find, again, a strong IT tech industry, focused on digital media, focused on artificial intelligence, and also a very strong aerospace hub. The region of Montreal accounts for about 50 to 60% of all aerospace businesses and jobs in Canada, thanks largely to the historical presence of Bombardier, and now the presence of Alstom and other and Airbus and other large players. Moving to the east into the Canadian maritime provinces, focus on fisheries, on ocean technologies, agri-food, and again, recurring theme, innovation and technology. And I've glossed over some of the other some of the other superclusters that are present across Canada, but you can see how they follow those industrial strengths across the country. So in the prairie provinces of Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, find the protein industry supercluster bringing together strengths thanks to the agricultural businesses that are present, to research institutes at the different universities that are present. Moving into Ontario, and again, dovetailing into the automobile industry, into a lot of the innovation that happens in manufacturing, an advanced manufacturing supercluster. Coming to Quebec, Scale AI, which is an artificial intelligence supercluster focused on the supply chain. And in the maritime provinces, the ocean supercluster focused on sustainability and technology initiatives around maritime technologies and maritime food production. One of the points that was brought up by Lauren as well is the market access that Canada provides. Canada benefits from a number of free trade agreements. With those free trade agreements in place, it has market access to over 1 billion consumers, naturally the USMCA, but also the Canada-EU Free Trade Agreement and the CPTPP. Now, if we can move on to the next slide. Some of the factors that make Canada an easy place in which to do business, and my colleagues from TCJ will go into a lot more detail about this in a few minutes. Canada is an easy place in which to do business with the UK, culturally very similar in terms of business practices. And there are a number of organizations that have recognized it as, as this place to start up and to enter the North American market. A very sound banking system, and again, repeating what was mentioned earlier, but adding a bit to it. Fintech penetration into Canada has been slow on the uptake, but Canadian banks are looking at innovating, are modernizing. And the reality is, because there's a limited number of banks often entering the banks, allows a business to make itself known or to have a stronger presence. In terms of education, Canada is a highly educated country. We have the highest rate in the OECD in terms of population having university level degrees, a number of leading universities across the country as well. In my case, I'm speaking for the city of Montreal, from where I'm from. At any given time, there are over 200,000 university students studying. That's on a 2 million person population. And another important factor as well is Canada's openness to attracting the best and brightest from around the world. Immigration policies are very pragmatic, are very practical, are focused on economic need. And so because of that, businesses often find that bringing in their best talent, whether it is from here in the UK or from anywhere else in the world, is very straightforward and is very simple. If we can move on. So I'm going to drill down onto the province of Quebec and the opportunities that are presented. That doesn't mean that this presentation doesn't, it goes beyond the scope of what Quebec has to offer. But essentially, if you look at the Quebec market, we're 25% of Canada's population, very close direct trade links with the Northeast of the US, representing a strong economic share and attracting a significant number of investment into the region in any given year. Economically, Quebec is dominated by the city of Montreal, which represents half of the province's population and half of its GDP. But there are a number of other metropolitan areas within the province, each with their own added strengths, their own market access, and their benefits. If we can move on to the next slide, please. Some of the key sectors that we find emerging in Canada and in Quebec, and that you'll see across Canada as well, repeating themselves amongst a lot of the large metropolitan hubs, are seen here. So as I mentioned earlier, aerospace is a key industry for the Montreal region. In terms of Canadian scope, it represents over half of the industry, and after Seattle is the second largest aerospace hub in North America. Video games and digital media development, film, animation, and so on have tremendous strengths. The life sciences and health technology sector, so Montreal together with Toronto have an important weight in the North American context in terms of the number of life sciences, pharmaceutical companies, and the innovation that comes out of those, and in cybersecurity as well. And within all those industries and all those sectors, other important ones that you find emerging, electric and smart transportation, and I'll touch on this for a little moment. Quebec today is the one place in North America where you can build the entire supply chain to build electric batteries for EVs can be found, from the rare earth minerals that are found in our subsoil, all the way through to the research and innovation expertise and the capacity to build and assemble battery cells. If we could move on to the next. Canada has the lowest tax rate on new business investment in the G7. You'll find different tax rates across Canada. So there is a dual system of taxation between federal and provincial taxes, and we'll get into that in a lot more detail in a few moments. Let's move on to the next slide. And what's really interesting and important, so there's a lot of information to digest on this specific slide, but what's really important to understand from it is that across Canada, there are a significant number of incentives and programs that are there to help support businesses in their growth. As Lauren mentioned earlier, a very robust R&D and innovation tax credit scheme that's present, promoting and supporting innovation by Canadian companies, but also by international companies that have a presence in Canada. There are a raft of incentives and programs in terms of capital investments, different tax credits for significant investments and so on, export development, export funding, training grants and so on that you'll find across the country, often delivered at the provincial level with different with slight differences in flavor. One thing I'd just like to point out as well, in Quebec, there is a specific focus on supporting software and technology development. We were the first jurisdiction in Canada to offer targeted tax incentives for the video games industry. We find similar incentives across the country now, and also specific incentives for software businesses that are looking at delivering software solutions. And because of that, a larger number of businesses look to Quebec and even look to other Canadian destinations in order to serve their North American clientele. So to move on very quickly and to wrap up, There are a number of support organizations that are present across Canada that fit in with DIT in order to support your growth and your entry into the market. Invest in Canada is an umbrella organization representing all of Canada with regional offices across Canada, working hand in hand with trade commissioners present in market here in the UK and elsewhere to support. And to finish off very quickly about Invest Quebec and about ourselves, my focus and my jurisdiction is on the province of Quebec, and together with Invest in Canada and the other players that are there, we're there to help you make connections, open into the network, into Quebec, into Canada, help you understand how to make a go of it, why it makes sense, and hold your hand and provide white glove treatment along your path of entry into the Canadian market. And that's it for me. I'll pass it back over to you, Brian, and I think we're going to get into a lot more detail about the nitty-gritty details of setting up in Canada.
Brilliant, thank you, Eric. That was really informative, thank you. I'd now like to turn to the first representative from TCJ, the law firm we work very closely with, and Genevieve Gagnier. Genevieve is a lawyer and works in international affairs, represents manufacturing, clientele, service providers, and businesses in the e-commerce sector. Interestingly, Genevieve's worked in Europe and North America and has developed an expertise in business support that allows her to advise clients in a practical way. Genevieve, hand over to you, please.
Thank you, Brian. Hi, everybody. I'm glad to be here with you today to talk in greater details about the free trade agreement in place between the UK and Canada, the Trade Continuity Agreement, or the TCA, which Lauren and Eric briefly mentioned in their presentation. So if you can move to the next slide, I think, or even two, yeah. So we have a couple of this presentation, so you see ourselves there. You can move on a couple until my presentation. Yes, again, we'll get to it. This is me. These are my colleagues. So I'll do this part. Please move on. So, and again, yes, here we are. As you see here, we may first ask ourselves, why does this agreement matter? As free trade agreements are often perceived as political in the first place. Well, I will not read the slides to you today. You can do it very well, and you see here some reasons why it makes a difference. The short answer is that all in all, it is better to have a free trade agreement in place than not to. You see example of tariff that would otherwise apply on goods that are amongst the most exported from the UK to Canada. Also, generally speaking, free trade agreements nowadays are not only about what you gain from it, but also, and maybe even more, about what you avoid losing in terms of market shares. Considering today's competitivity in global trade, free trade agreements are among the factors that have an influence, especially for small and medium enterprises, because the costs of trade are proportionally higher for them. So even great little help can make a difference. So you can move on. Thank you. So let us talk about the TCA. It is a short form agreement, as you probably know. Basically, Canada and the UK took CETA, the free trade agreement in force between Canada and the European Union, and said, okay, this is what will apply between us until we figure out how our future relationship will be. Of course, some adaptations were necessary, just because the fact that CETA was drafted for a bloc of 28 countries and we are now in a bilateral context. So what the TCA essentially does is to set out the deviation from CETA to apply to the TCA as if it had been concluded between the UK and Canada in the first instance. This was the most convenient option for many reasons, mostly due to the unique historical context of the time. First of all, the UK was not only busy negotiating with Canada, but with so many other countries too, with which a free trade agreement was in place and which were about to become inapplicable. Negotiations with the European Union were also still ongoing, and this was obviously the focus at the time. And the priority of all stakeholders during this diplomatic marathon was to provide for trade continuity, and this is what the short-form agreement would offer. Canada is not a unique example in this regard. About 35 such agreements were entered into by the UK, combining 67 countries altogether. So you can move to the next slide. Thank you. So as you see here, there is an exception to the short form. Everything what has to do with tariff or tariff rate quota. This is the quantity of goods that can enter the market at a zero or reduced tariff rate is set out in details in the TCA, just as in any other complete free trade agreement. The other issues will be agreed upon during the upcoming years. Canada and the UK are soon to initiate negotiations on a more permanent free trade agreement. You heard about Lauren about this from Lauren. The TCA provides that negotiations should begin within 1 year of the TCA entering into force, which was on April 1st, with the aim of concluding it within the next 3 years. So if we move on, thank you. In the meantime, what we shall do is basically to apply CETA like before, while keeping an eye on the TCA to see if there's any deviation that is provided for in the TCA on a particular topic. Some of the main differences are set out here. So one of them, European Union, was replaced by United Kingdom. It may sound almost pointless to remind this, but it really shows what the TCA is about. You take CETA, you replace EU by UK, and here you have the TCA. More or less, of course, there are other differences, including tariff rate quotas that had to be adapted. Time-bound commitment were also concerned. We know that tariff elimination in all free trade agreements generally occur gradually over a certain period of time. When you heard after the conclusion of CETA that 98% of goods would be traded duty-free, it was true, but in 7 years from then. Now we are 4 years after the CETA's provisional application in 2017, and we don't go back in the TCA. We keep the same schedule. However, for everything that has to do with regulatory cooperation, harmonizations of norms and standards, the so-called non-tariff barriers, the clock was generally reset just because it is about adapting local legislations. So in this context, the new committee that you see here that will created will evaluate all those issues under the UK and the EU legislation. So moving on to the next slide, if we look closer to tariff now, so you can see that by 2024, indeed, 98% of the goods will be traded duty-free. So this concerns, in more detail, 94% of agricultures and agri-food product, 99% of industrial goods, and 100% of fish, seafood, and forest product. So new tariff code are now in place. The special authorization number that was used during the provisional application of the TCA shall no longer be used. If you have exported to Canada and paid custom duties while you were entitled to a preferential tariff, you have 4 years to apply for a reimbursement. Special measures apply in the agricultural sector. This is always the case and amongst the most sensitive issues in any free trade agreement. The background here is food safety. No nation wants to be dependent on the others on that issue. That's why we have quotas administered in the form of import license. So it means that you have to first find a qualified customer who will then apply for that license. Supply management system also applies in the dairy industry in Canada. And to avoid the delicate political issue of reopening the negotiation on that topic, we just relied on the EU reserve in the WTO, which should be sufficient, as we know that quotas are not fully used anyway. So moving to the next slides, Rules of origin are also very important in international trade, as they are used to determine the economic nationality of a good and thus its eligibility to a preferential tariff. Here, continuity is granted as the same rules as under the CETA are applied, and as UK exporter, you can continue counting EU originating good as UK originating good for the purpose of meeting the required regional content. Rules of origins in the TCA are generally simpler than in other free trade agreements like the USMCA, for instance, the free trade agreement between Canada and the United States. Still, I may state the obvious here, but please allow me this reminder, as experience has shown that it may happen. You always have to first check the HS code of the product you are exporting to see if it is not already traded duty-free under the most favored nation rate of the WTO. So that you don't have in such a case to prepare a certification of origin and a bill of material, which implies having the list of all the subcomponents of the finished product. And even if a tariff would be applicable, there's still a bit of a strategy that is required here. You basically need to determine how much it costs to comply with the rules of origin versus how much you'll gain from benefiting from the preferential tariff. A custom expert will be of a great help here. Don't forget also the principle that goods must in principle be shipped directly to the country in which the preferential tariff will be claimed, unless it remains under custom surveillance during transshipment. So moving to the next slide. This brings us to labor mobility and more generally to trade and services. So here the principle is simple. If you want to know the rule, look for the exception. The CETA and accordingly the TCA are so-called negative list agreements, which means that everything is by default permitted except what is specifically prohibited. This is all stated in annexes that are quite extensive and that you need to read carefully. But generally, qualified workers, independent professionals, intra-company transferee, and contractual service provider will have a much easier access to work permits. Please note that in all cases, we are talking here about temporary stay. The TCA doesn't address the issue of permanent residence or citizenship. So moving on to the next slide. Thank you. So the future business relationship, Canada-UK. So what we can say here, and generally speaking, is that free trade agreements are here to stay. And considering the increasing number of them that are entered into worldwide, they will play an even greater role in setting the framework within which global trade takes place. This is especially the case since we have this so-called new generation agreement like CETA that go far beyond the mere liberalization of tariffs and are used by countries in a regional context to shape their trading policy according to their respective interests. Free trade agreements nowadays contain provision about the environment, labor rights, consumer protection, etc. The future free trade agreement between Canada and the UK is expected in this regard to be even more progressive than CETA, especially taking into account UK's potential access to the CPTPP, to which Canada is a party, which link both countries that are called upon to become close and strong allies. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Genevieve. Much appreciated. Really, really interesting. I'd like now to turn to Micheline Desaru. Micheline is, apart from being a very keen sailor, as I know from firsthand, is a pioneer in international business law. Her clientele is made up of Canadian manufacturers, technological companies, and service providers targeting international markets. Micheline's also Director of IP and IT and International Departments at TJC. Please, Micheline, can I pass to you?
Thank you very much, Brian, and good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to meet all of you today. My role is to give you a little bit of an environment about the landscape of Canada from a legal point of view, where Isabelle Tremblay will tackle more like the taxation issues later on. If we can move to the next slide, please. Canadian landscape, and I'm sorry, there's a little typo here because there's 3 territories and 10 provinces, not 2. A little mistake that was missed when doing the verification. But one thing that is obviously important, as was already explained by Lauren, there's federal laws, there are provincial laws. Some type of companies or activities are ruled by federal legislation. For example, you've got the banking, the telecoms, ports and airports, defense, etc. But most likely, if you're a manufacturer or a service provider, you'll end up being ruled in most of the instances by the provincial legislations. Although, depending what you're doing, you're going to have either a federal law applying. I gave you a few examples. For example, intellectual property such as trademarks, patents, and copyrights is federal. Employment law is usually provincial. Real estate is provincial. Contractual law, you do have on one side the common law, and on the other side the civil code in the province of Quebec, and we'll get back to this. Next slide, please. Obviously, when we're talking about civil law for the province of Quebec, it's very different from what you're accustomed to if you've done business with France. Our civil code has been modernized nearly 30 years ago and was certainly made closer to what was happening in North America. So as well, you're going to have to tackle provincial or federal when it comes to licenses, permits, technical specifications. For example, food and drug will be regulated by the federal system, etc. Court system, very much like in the UK, same thing, professional, no corruption, so it's a very stable, strong court system, and a lot of even the common law is imported into civil law and looked at, and obviously UK court decisions are often of a lot of importance, for example, in IP. So it's a sophisticated legal system. Next slide, please. Sorry, I don't have to explain again the proximity with the US, but for certainly different opportunities, you would have to look at maybe setting up shop in Canada and being very close to the US market. If you're thinking about, for example, assembling or manufacturing in Canada, it might be a very good idea, and then you're going to have this free flow going between the countries that might be of strategic importance for you, that's for sure. Next slide, as this was pretty much well explained by Genevieve. So you want to constitute a corporate entity in Canada or acquire a business. There's many forms of entities. Usually you're going to have a choice, for example, for a corporation instead of a partnership, you're going to go for either federal or provincial. Because this is a possibility that exists here but does not exist in the United States, where you don't have federal laws or federal corporations. But please keep in mind that in the choice of either going federal or provincial, there's a minimum of Canadian residents or citizens that you have to have on your board, depending on the size of the company. So for some companies that are don't have anybody that they really trust and know and want to transfer over from the UK, it may be a good idea to rather go for a provincial corporation. And laws are pretty much similar as far as rates are concerned and things like that. So that's easy enough. Tax planning, strongly recommended. So listen to Isabelle with a lot of attention, please, because it's an important element. Next slide, please. When purchasing a business, obviously a good due diligence is going to need to be done like you would in any other country and in the UK as well. Please note that in Quebec and in many of the provinces, if you purchase the assets and you think that you're getting rid of all of the employment continuity and that you can, terminate people you don't need, etc., that's not the case. So there's a continuity very often if the business itself continues. So that's an important element. Obviously, you also may be stuck with tax liabilities if you haven't examined, what the tax situation was for the vendor, and you haven't taken the necessary means to protect yourself and be indemnified. So, and you won't be able to access the financial information of the company that you want to purchase, except for what is being disclosed to you or with a particular consent signed, because it's not public information like you would have, for example, in France. So trademarks and intellectual property should also be looked at very carefully, because many smaller business have not necessarily done all of their work to properly register their patents or their trademarks, for example, or have not kept current with what is exactly the situation. A change of logo and things like that may have skipped their minds, and that's going to be important if you want to be able to exploit the business. Next slide, please. The real estate matters are also essential. You need to verify that the intent that you want to give to your business at that particular location that you're purchasing is allowed under municipality regulations, and not a simple question of acquired rights over time, which would mean if there's a fire, you have to move to some other location because he wouldn't be able to rebuild, or obviously look at the lease as a transferable in case of change of control or sale of the business, etc. So a lot of things you would do again in the UK. Next slide, please. If you're opening up a new company, a new business in Canada, or acquiring control, you're going to have to deal with Investment Canada. I gave you the hyperlink there, and it's a notice, formal notice that needs to be given, and that traces back to the ownership of the individuals owning the business. Obviously, if you go over a certain threshold, then it's not only a notice that you have to give, but it's rather a review that needs to be done by Investment Canada. Obviously, you see that the threshold is very high for UK businesses, and there may be obviously some particular sectors where that might also require some kind of an examination by Investment Canada. But that's something to look for. Again, one other element, next slide, please. Obviously, distributors and sales representatives. Having been in the European Union yourselves, and I understand that a lot of the legislation has also been basically cloned about what was happening for sales representatives, commercial agents, for example. We have no specific law dealing with either of those. They're dealt with through the civil code as a contract, usual contract, commercial contract, or common law. Obviously, if your relationship has lasted for quite a long time, you may be in for indemnities and a long prior notification of termination. So this is something that you're really going to need to negotiate with the people that you want to do business with, and that are going to be a success story for your venture into Canada. Next slide, please. Beware of the possibility that if you're doing business with a commercial agent in particular, so a representative that you're appointing may be considered as an employee. If he only works for you and you control pretty much everything, then that's an employee situation, and then all of the labor laws kick in, and maybe some taxation issues as well. So being from a commercial point of view, you've seen the size of Canada. Don't think one single distributor or agent will be able to cover all of that territory. You need to find there's some niche specific market segments, smaller territory. You want this to work. So you really want to have people that are going to have the time and the resources to be able to cover properly the entire country or some regions of Canada. And beware, protect your own trademarks. Do not rely on agents or distributors to register this for you, because if termination happens, obviously then they have your trademarks in their portfolio. It's a little bit of a problem. We don't see as much, I'd say, of bad faith registrants as you would in some other parts of the globe, but still it's a precaution to do. And this is one of your most worthy assets, your IP and your trademarks. Be sure to protect them yourselves. Next slide. Employment laws, as time is flying. Again, unless you're in a federal regulated sector, employment laws are going to be provincial. So you're going to have to register with various federal and provincial agencies for the withholdings, the social programs, the contributions, etc. We are not a country like the US of employment at will. We're very much like in the UK. The employer has to protect, and the laws are there to protect the employees in a relationship that is a little bit more or friendlier to employees than it is to employers, but still. And obviously, minimum standards and health and safety are going to be there. And you have to look at that very, very carefully. So if you're going across Canada and you want to open or a few offices or have employees working remotely in a few different provinces, again, it's like starting a separate company. It's not opening up a company, but setting up everything that relates to your activities as an employer in that particular province to be able to hire the person. Next slide, please. Management personnel are often not covered. At least higher management is not necessarily covered by the Minimum Standards Act of these provinces. And like in Quebec, you would be under civil code. So which means that you need to be very careful at all of the provisions about, you know, termination and what you expect from your manager in order to be able to terminate a relationship in the right way. And you may be in for longer periods and notices and indemnities. Anti-harassment protection, a mandatory policy for that in the province of Quebec, and it's spreading throughout Canada. We do also have a federal and a provincial Charter of Rights and Liberties, which protects employees against discrimination of various matters. So it's very similar to what you'd find in the UK. Next slide, please. Employment law, not employment law, intellectual property. Think about Canada when filing your patents, because you will not be able to do that later. Same thing for Canada and your trademark registrations. It's actually very long at the moment. It takes over 3 years to get trademarks processed because we did a huge change in the law and joined the Madrid Protocol. So in advance, take the time, please, to just look at this and understanding that even if you're not selling at the end in Canada directly, most goods will make their way up the border from the US if you're selling it to the border. You'll need some licensed Canadian patents and trademark agents. Availability searches are very important to do when it comes to trademarks, because we're a country that recognizes common law trademarks, which means that if you've used a trademark in Canada, you already have some rights, although they may not be across Canada in the entire country. That's one of the reasons why you should register them. But still, if there are some people that are there before you, have not registered their trademarks, but are using the trademark, then they have priority rights to yours. Trade secrets are not necessarily protected by a specific regulation or law like it is in the EU. So you're going to rely on NDAs for sure to make sure that everybody that you deal with will respect your trade secrets and confidential information. And now, and finishing up pretty much on the fact that we do have 2 languages. If you can go to the next slide, please, Thais. Obviously, it causes some challenges in Canada because, for example, it's supposed to be totally bilingual. In fact, that's not the case. A lot of the population where you go are not bilingual, although they have learned the language in school. But still, you may have difficulty finding employees, for example, in some regions that are absolutely bilingual. It's also a question of mandatory labeling and marking of your products, for example. It's going to need to be done in both languages. The situation is quite different from what it is in Europe. You have to understand that we're just a few millions of francophones surrounded by over 330 million anglophones. If there was no measures to try to protect the language, it would easily disappear over time. This is one of the reasons why in the province of Quebec in particular, there's been a particular mandatory law, the Charter of French Languages, that's there to try to make sure that the language and the culture remains vibrant in Quebec. And there's some changes, a new bill that's been passed on that. And finally, and you don't have a slide about this, but obviously immigration and visas, these take time, there's a lot of things with the UK that may make things simpler to get temporary employment people transferred. It's based on citizenship again, and not necessarily permanent residency. So if you plan to send some people over, it's very important that you seek specialized specialty from a law firm such as ours, just to try to see if the person you expect to send will be able to come, and how much time that's going to take as well, maybe a little bit lengthy depending what you do. So thank you for your attendance to this part of the conference, and Brian, back to you.
Thank you, Micheline. You covered a lot of subjects there in 15 minutes, so really appreciate it. Now I'd like to turn to Isabelle Tremblay. Isabelle is a tax lawyer, represents companies and their shareholders in their dealings with tax authorities, can provide support with international taxation, including succession, labour mobility and e-commerce. And Isabelle is also co-director of the tax department at TJC. So Isabelle, over to you.
Thank you very much, Brian. So we finish off with taxation. Probably not the most interesting matter, but certainly, unfortunately, unavoidable in every commercial transaction. As you can see, I'm probably not as fluent as the previous speakers in English, but I'll try to do my best today. So we can move on, please. So as for individuals, corporate tax is based on the residency of a person. So the presentation is split, and along the presentation, we'll make the difference between resident corporations and non-resident corporations. So if we go along, foreign corporation, that is non-resident corporations in Canada, only those that are doing or that are carrying on business, in Canada, and who have a permanent establishment in accordance with the UK-Canada tax treaty, or liable for corporate taxes in Canada, on, of course, the income that is attributable to that permanent or to those permanent establishment. Also, foreign corporations who are also selling real property in Canada or deriving passive income like dividend interest in Canada are also liable for taxes in Canada in a different part of the Income Tax Act and are subject to withholdings. Now for corporations, so let's say there's a UK corporation wanting to establish in Canada and open up a real company here, and not only a branch. So corporations constituted under the Canadian Corporations Act or any of the provinces' corporation status, as Micheline mentioned, are also liable for corporate taxes, of course in Canada, but on their worldwide income, since they are considered as Canadian residents. So in Canada, there's two levels of jurisdiction. Everybody mentioned this, but it's the same thing for taxation. So we have the federal and the provincial level in regards of corporate income taxes. Therefore, the corporate taxes vary from one province to the other, although similar. We will see the tax rate a little bit further on. And the rates apply depending on the presence of a permanent establishment or not in a province. So a corporation will be liable for taxes in Canada, will pay taxes at the federal government and in the provinces where it has a permanent establishment, which is a concept that is very similar to the one in the UK-Canada tax treaty. So we can move along, please. In Quebec, we have a particularity. We are the only province that requires a separate tax return to be filed. So every corporation that do business in Canada and are liable for taxes in Canada file a T2 return with the Canada Revenue Agency. And a corporation that has a permanent establishment and does business in Quebec also needs to file a CO-17 form with l'Agence du Revenu du Québec, which is the same thing as the Canada Revenue Agency, but in Quebec. We can move along, please. In Canada, the corporate tax rate, as I mentioned, varies depending on if you're a resident or not. If you're a non-resident corporation solely doing business in Canada and deriving income from Canada, you have only one general tax rate for active and passive business income. So we will see that rate in a couple of slides, but for corporations that are resident in Canada. So let's say you incorporate a business here in Canada, you have employees, you're doing business, you have an office, you have a manufacturer, whatever. The tax rate that will apply to this corporation depends on several things. Depends on the type of income generated and the status. The key element is to determine if a corporation is a Canadian-controlled private corporation or not. What is a CPCC? A CPCC is a Canadian corporation, so either a corporation constituted under the laws of Canada or is resident of Canada under the Mine and Management Test. The second condition is to be a private corporation, so it excludes all public corporations. And the third condition is not to be controlled by one or several non-residents. So a 50% share ownership by Canadian and foreign shareholders would qualify for a CPCC. Why is it interesting to qualify it as a CPCC? Is that you can benefit from a nice tax rate or a lower tax rate on the first $500,000 of income, of business income carried on in Canada. You can also benefit from higher scientific research and development tax credit. And also, if you're interested in allowing your employees to participate in a stock option plan, then if you're a CPCC, there's some specific rules that are beneficial to employees that are involved in a stock option plan. So there's a lot more tax incentives for CPCC, but these are the most popular that we can see in our practice. Another interesting tax specificity of Canada is that only 50% of the capital gains are taxed in Canada. So, and they are considered as investment income as for the tax rate applicable. So this is interesting for businesses that generate capital gains on real property they sell or whatever, same thing as individuals. We can move on, please. So as I mentioned, non-CPCCs or foreign corporations are taxed at the same tax rate, notwithstanding the type of income generated, either it's active business income or investment income, and they only pay taxes on 50% of the capital gains. As for foreign corporations earning passive income or selling real property, they are also taxed in Canada because the source of income is in Canada. Passive income, in comparison with active business income, is subject to a 25% tax withholding in the Income Tax Act, but this withholding rate can be lowered by the rate applicable under the UK-Canada Tax Treaty. Quebec doesn't withhold any amount of money on passive income. The withholding is only at the federal income. It's interesting to mention this. Under the UK-Canada Tax Treaty, the withholding tax rate applicable to dividends is either 10% if the recipient, so if the shareholder holds 10% or more of the voting powers of the Canadian corporation paying the dividend, or if not, 50% rate applies instead of the 25%. If there's some interest paid from Canada to a mother corporation or another corporation in the UK, the withholding applicable under the tax treaty is 10%. And on royalties, it depends. It's either 0 or 10%, depending on the type of royalty. So these are the rates applicable in the UK-Canada tax treaty that you need to be aware of in any exchange of commercial activity between a Canadian company and a UK company. Next slide, please. So here we have the tax rate applicable to every provinces in Canada and the federal. So I mentioned that it's the combined federal provincial corporate tax rate, but of course, let's say there's investment income of a CCPC, you have the federal rate that is 38.7%, and you need to add the provincial rate of Quebec, BC, Alberta. There's a lot more provinces and territories in Canada, but I've mentioned only the ones where the ones that are most popular in Canada. So, as I mentioned, for non-residents and also for non-CPCCs, you have the tax rate in the first column. Then you have the small business tax rate for CCPCs on the first $500,000 of income. So you can see that in Quebec, let's say, on the first $500,000 of active business income generated in Quebec, the tax rate is 13%. On the income generated that is higher than $500,000, then we go back to the first column, which is 26.5%. So the tax rate are pretty interesting in Canada and almost all of the provinces here, depending on the type of income. But overall, we are very competitive as for taxation in the G7 countries. We can move along. So this is really these were the general considerations for corporate taxation. Of course, we as taxation lawyers, we work with like 4 inches of height of law. So this was really a general overview in the time that was allowed to me. But of course, we cannot speak about taxation in Canada without considering the sales tax here in Canada. So we also in Canada have a VAT, a value-added tax. As for corporate taxes, for the value-added tax, we have the federal level, so it's called the GST, and the provincial sales tax. Only entities like foreign and Canadian making taxable supplies in Canada in the course of their commercial activities must be registered for GST, which is a factual analysis. So if you ask me, well, you know, do I need to register? I'm a foreign corporation selling into Canada. It depends on, you know, the links that you have in Canada and the degree of presence that you have here in Canada. In Quebec, we also have a value-added tax, which has a rate of 9.975% rate, and corporations that do have a place of business in Canada must register for QST and GST with Revenu Quebec, as in comparison with businesses that do not have a place of business in Quebec. They need to register and get their GST number with the CRA. So this is a little bit different if you're doing business or not in Quebec. Of course, if you're in another province and you register for GST with the Canada Revenue Agency, but you make deliveries into Quebec and you solicit business, then you need to register for QST because you're sending goods and products into Quebec. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, if a corporation does not have a place of business, it needs to register with the Canada Revenue Agency. If it does have a place of business in Quebec, it needs to register with QST and GST in Quebec. There's no sales tax in Alberta, and in BC, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan, it's not a value-added tax. They have a final consumer's tax called the provincial sales tax, and normally companies regularly shipping products in these provinces or actively soliciting sales have the obligation to register and ask for the tax from their clients and remit it to these provinces. Next slide, please. In the other provinces, eastern Eastern Canada and in Ontario, the GST is replaced by the HST, so it's an harmonized sales tax. The rate is either 50% or 30%, and they only need to register for the HST when they register for the GST. So automatically, if they get registered for the GST, they are registered for the HST. And of course, as in the US, and I imagine in UK, some supplies are not taxable. I've given some examples here. So not all products that you sell in Canada will be taxable. Depends on what you're selling in Canada. Next slide, please. We can move on. Thank you. I know that my time is finished, but you do have the slides regarding the importation of products into Canada. What you need to know in Canada, we do have the importer number that you need to get from the Canada Revenue Agency to import some products in Canada. It's like the ERI number in the UK. So the first thing that you need to get to import products in Canada is your business number from the Canada Revenue Agency. And I've explained in this slide and also The others, do I only want? Yeah, I only have one slide regarding the GST upon importation, but it's pretty clear. So I don't want to take up too much of your time today. You can read that last slide, and well, thank you for your attention, and hopefully we'll be talking soon. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Isabel. I think that wraps up today's session. I think everyone will agree we've squeezed a lot of information into an hour and a quarter. Ran over by a couple of minutes, but I think that was inevitable given the breadth of the subjects we were covering. So just to say thank you to all of the participants. A recording of this and the slides will be available certainly through our website and through other sources as well. Please do check Owen Mitchell's website for legal updates as we go. And as I mentioned, we will be carrying out other Invest In seminars and webinars in the future, including an Invest in the UK from Canada. So we look forward to that. Please do try and give us your feedback. You should have received a feedback form a few minutes ago. So thank you once again for attending. Really appreciate it, and we'll see you soon.